and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shereen.
And it is officially the month of March. It is Women's History Month,
Woo!
which we're going to promote a lot more than for us in Canada. This is the month where, it keeps snowing and you're so irritated by the whole thing.
As there's a snowstorm happening right now outside.
Yeah,
I'm just so irritated.
Snowed 15 or so centimeters since this morning outside when we're recording this episode. I think we're hitting that time.
We're over it.
Where we're over it. The entire country hits that period, I think, in the month of March, where, the first 3 weeks of March, everybody's like, fuck this fucking season.
Yeah, and then it goes on until, end of April, and then May, we get some nice weather.
Yeah, we might get, a random snowfall or two that are heavier in April, but it's always really hard to say what's going to happen. So I think that we're going to focus on something a lot more fun, which is that it's Women's History Month all throughout the month of March. Thank goodness.
Let's do it.
So obviously, in celebration of that, for this entire month, we're going to be talking about everything to do with women in literature, their impact on literature, history of their impact on literature, how everything got started, how women got started writing, and we're also going to talk about a couple of adaptations in between, which we always do, focusing on a couple of very different things, I would say. A couple of very different types of adaptations from one another. So,
well, kind of an older one and then a much more modern one. Modern story of women's history, I would say.
For sure. And women making an impact on the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to be doing. And that's actually what we're kicking things off with this month. In order to kind of start things off, we decided to go a little bit more modern. So today we're talking about the recently 2022 released film adaptation of She Said, which is based on a novel, or a nonfiction novel, I should say, and in turn, which is based on the true story of two New York Times reporters who were two of the first people to really bring to light the Harvey Weinstein sex scandal when everything was coming out. Back in 2017, they investigated and published the article that would inevitably lead to his arrest.
And the Me Too movement.
As a whole, which I would argue potentially started back in when, Donald Trump was running for president initially. I would argue that there was some of it was already, there were rumblings of at that time, and that obviously other people had been fighting for certain things at that time anyway. It's not to say that they started it. However, they definitely helped propel it into the spotlight, because this scandal and Weinstein's arrest and all of the allegations against him have been so incredibly massive that I think it was like a global phenomenon really that took over.
And, as this movie demonstrates, his what's the word I'm looking for? His crimes did span across the world. He committed 100%. Them all over the world.
Internationally. They weren't just relegated to LA specifically, for instance. So, it's a bit of a heavy one. So I should give a general, I think, considering everything we just said, I think a general trigger warning sort of goes without saying. But just in general, it's totally normal, totally expected. If anything like this bothers you, just be aware of it, because we are going to be discussing some of the details of these, because they are discussed throughout the course of the film. Yeah. But we can get into it right now, and we can talk about She Said from 2022.
Exactly that we're looking at here.
These young women walked into what they all had reason to believe were business meetings.
I can still see it, the hotel room, the floor plan. He kept trying to touch me.
I asked him to leave me alone.
Instead, they say he met them with threats and sexual demands.
I was young, scared.
Hi. We're from the New York Times. I believe you used to work for Harvey Weinstein.
So the movie was released in November of last year at the time of recording, and it currently has a score of 7.2 out of 10 on IMDb and 88% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I'm surprised at that IMDb score. I would have thought it would have higher.
Yeah, you know what? Strangely, actually, this is one of the few times that I've seen that the Rotten Tomatoes score, the audience score, is actually higher than the critic score, which is interesting. Audience score is at 91.
Huh. Yeah.
Which I buy it.
Yeah, I buy that.
This is an incredibly well-made film.
It's
whether
very
or
good.
not, obviously, whether or not the subject matter makes you squeamish. This is,
and it should.
It probably will for almost everybody.
Give you the ick.
Yeah. Which, it probably will for almost everybody. It's really... It's a very well-made film. It's a well-acted film. And it's one of those that, while taking, a kind of partially fictionalized, because we don't know what every conversation was between people, a partially fictionalized look into a very real scandal, it never feels over the top or like it's trying to sensationalize itself.
Yeah, I think it did feel like it was very like factual.
Grounded?
Yeah, like I think a lot of, the letters and the evidence and the recordings and they were doing, like Megan said, they were doing like an adaptation of it throughout. I don't believe that they were taking anything that was put out there and then just kind of inserting that in the movie, like recordings, for example.
No.
But they did a really good job of sticking to reality.
Yeah.
And it really did feel that way,
It did. And even I'd have to credit like the screenplay and stuff, is that even the conversations between characters, sometimes you're watching a film and it very much feels like a film because like the script has made it feel like a movie. So even if you've got people who are playing reporters, the way that they're speaking, the way that they're having conversations with people, feels like a movie. Like you feel like you're watching a movie and stuff. Whereas I did find that with a lot of the script in this, particularly phone call conversations between like the two lead characters as well as like the people that they're speaking to, so much of it felt like these are the words you would use. Yeah. This is what you would say to these people. There are hesitations and stilted kind of awkwardness in some of the conversations.
And the questions that they're asking as well. Like, I very much felt the whole time that I'm like, I could see a reporter asking a question like that. And I don't think that I've ever thought that way while watching a movie like this with reporters. You know, I was very much like, oh, wow, like they're really probing like in a way that I wouldn't have normally spoken to somebody. And I'm like, that's definitely coming from them being reporters,
Yeah, 100%. Because you wouldn't go around asking people questions like this on a regular basis.
No, like, and how did that make you feel,
Yeah,
like,
and how do you feel about this particular allegation or issue or whatever. Yeah. So, just as an overview, if for some reason, and I don't mean this in a terrible way, but I feel like if you haven't heard about any of this stuff, you've been living under a rock. Like, actually, like, most of the time if people are like, oh, I've never seen that movie, or like, I don't know who that particular celebrity is and stuff like that, like, okay, cool, I totally get it. There's a ton of people that all of us have no idea who they are, and that makes sense to me. But if you don't know about this, I don't even know how you'd be listening to this podcast right now.
Fair enough. I mean, to be fair, like, I feel like when this story broke, I wasn't that, like, familiar with who Harvey Weinstein was at the time because he's a producer, right? So it's not like he's, like an actor or something, right?
No,
and, like,
I think that, but as soon as you do a quick Google, basically, and realize how big, obviously, Miramax functioned as a company and how how far-reaching how
powerful
were, basically, like, as far as what they could manage and what they had been behind as well. Then I think the scope of everything starts to really come into focus because you're kind of like, how is this possible? And then you realize the specifics of everything behind it and you're like, oh, okay.
Oh, that's how.
Oh, that's how. So...
Not that we're condoning it.
No.
And what I did particularly like about this movie is that they kept drawing it back to the fact that they were trying to do... an investigation on the entire industry and, like sexual assault in Hollywood and how the whole system is set up to protect the predators.
And to enable them, really,
basically.
as well, which it does and probably still continues to do. I wouldn't be shocked. Just because this has happened doesn't mean everything's perfect and wonderful.
I mean, like, this is decades and decades, right? Yes. Like, this is not something that you're going to break down in 5 or 6 years.
No. Yeah. So, obviously, since this is all based on real events, of course, this story follows basically the progress of two of the New York Times reporters, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. We love a Megan who does something cool with her life.
Okay, Megan.
Yeah. Who were sort of brought into the fold. So basically, you do kind of start things off with a little bit of a look into like what each of them were kind of doing prior to this, because the film does begin in 2016. So several months before a lot of the allegations against Harvey Weinstein began to come to light. And Megan Tui's character was already, obviously she was very involved in a lot of this sort of subject matter, because she was one of the reporters who again published a story when Trump was running for president about his allegations of sexual assault against him as well. And so obviously this is something she was working on, but of course she took a leave of absence for a period of time, maternity leave, because she was having a baby. So while she was away, Jodie Cantor, who's played by Zoe Kazan, she receives a tip, basically, that Rose McGowan, who's an actress that I don't know that people now necessarily know that much. Like, we grew up with Charm.
Yeah, I was
so
gonna
I'm
say,
like it's
she's the woman from Charm.
And Scream, like, she's Tatum in the original Scream movie. So, like, for me, I'm like, yeah, she's a big deal.
Yeah.
Like,
from the 90s? Yeah, she was a big deal in the 90s.
Jawbreaker,
Yeah.
she's in oh my god, that Quentin Tarantino double feature there, Grindhouse.
That's it, yep.
She's in both of those, you know, so if you were around, like, late 90s through mid-2000s, you know who Rose McGowan is. Even if you don't know her name, you've seen her in something at some point.
For sure. You see a picture of her and you're like, oh yeah, I know her. Yeah.
So Jodie Cantor receives basically a tip that Rose McGowan is currently working on a book to indicate that back in the late 90s, if I'm not mistaken, she was sexually assaulted by Harvey Weinstein while working with him on a production. And she's writing a book about her experiences because she's previously tried to talk about it, but
it's never gone anywhere.
It's never gone anywhere, and she doesn't feel like she's being taken seriously. And she initially, even when Jodie reaches out to her, she initially declines to comment on it because she's like, I don't know why you think you're going to get anywhere further. You're going to do a better job. I've tried to speak to people before, and everyone has ignored me. So now I'm just doing my own thing.
Yeah,
basically.
and that's kind of a dialogue that comes through often in this movie. Every time.
The initial reaction that a lot of the women have, if they're not afraid, they are completely dismissive of it and very jaded, like, oh, haha, like, you really think anything's going to
like,
come
do you
of
really
this?
think you're going to change anything?
Exactly. So she initially obviously declines to contact. She's, like, fine about it. She's like, all right, yeah, thanks, bye, basically. But later on, I guess she obviously takes some time to think about it, or she must have taken time to think about it, calls Jodie back and explains, basically walks her through the encounter of what occurred between the two of them when she was working. She said said that this happened when she was 23.
And a lot of them mentioned this. I noticed that a few of them said that they were 23
Yeah,
when
the
this
very
happened.
early 20s, a lot. I'd say the vast majority of them. Also because of, yes, this occurred with actresses, but it also occurred with Miramax employees very often as well. And I believe
assistants
that
a lot of the time.
The assistants that were working with him that were working on different productions. And I believe that 23 kind of makes sense because people are up and coming and young.
They're early in their careers. Whether you're an actress or whether you're trying to make your way up in the film industry, 23 makes sense. Like, you would have just kind of come out of college or university, and a lot of them are, I think what makes it even more tragic, and I think what most of the stories were saying was, I was young, I was excited to start my career, I was going places, I was really bright, and you would assume that they would have to be, right? If they got hired by Miramax.
Yeah, you're not like an idiot.
No, like, they would have to be quite good, like, at that young of an age to get hired on.
Yeah, basically, if you don't know any of this, just watch, like, any movie from basically like the mid 80s through mid 2000s and tell me how often you see Miramax pop up as a production company involved.
So many of them. It's very quietly fizzled out.
Well, yeah, nobody's upset about that. Anyway, so after obviously Jodie gets this information from her, she's also starting to look into things a little bit more regarding, the employees themselves from Miramax, potentially, who had been assaulted at some point or another. And she also winds up speaking, she sees she sees a video prior to Trump's, like, election, basically. She sees a video of Ashley Judd when she was speaking out at a rally against Trump.
Yes.
And she's, seen as well that Ashley Judd herself has previously stated that she was assaulted and harassed by a very big shot producer, and she did not name this producer, but she's written about experiences before. And also, and in reality outside of this as well, Ashley Judd does cameo as herself in the film. And she has been very candid. I've seen a few interviews and stuff. She has been very candid herself about the fact that she's a 3-time survivor of sexual assault.
Wow.
So she's had to deal with a lot that way. And she's been a very outspoken advocate regarding all of this as well.
Yeah.
So after seeing this, Jodie reaches out to her as well. They do speak a little bit, and basically, she's saying the exact same thing that a lot of other people are saying, where she's like, I want to be able to tell my truth, but every time I've attempted to before, no one has listened.
Yeah, it's gone nowhere.
Yes, and I would like to get work at some point for the rest of my life. Like, I'd like to actually be able to work again and make money.
But the sad thing is that, like, many of these actresses who did speak out, it seems like it really did have a big impact on their careers.
Yeah, so I've read a few things back and forth about this sort of stuff. My understanding, and I think that this was mostly confirmed, is that, like, Ashley Judd, for instance, was blocked from being able to be in Lord of the Rings because of Weinstein, and because she had, like, refused his advances when he had attempted something, which my understanding, it was back in basically, like, the mid-90s when she was doing Kiss the Girls, which is a movie that I really like. So that also makes me sad, because also, like, Ashley Judd's one of those too. I think, like no one knows who she is now, but if you grew up in, like, the 90s and early to mid 2000s, Ashley Judd was, like, a film darling. She was in a bunch of rom-coms, a bunch of, like, thrillers and stuff. She was in a ton of stuff.
Her mom, Winona.
I think Winona's her sister, or Naomi is her sister. Shit, I can't remember.
I thought she was, like, related to Winona somehow.
She is. Yeah. No, she is. It's like a family of country western singers and stuff as well. She's just the actress of the group, basically. Right.
Anyway, I digress.
Yeah, it's fine. Anyway, so that is my understanding, is that, and I believe that the whole thing about her being blocked from getting a role in Lord of the Rings was confirmed by Peter Jackson, but I'm not 100% sure, but I think he actually might have confirmed that.
I feel like I read something about this. Yeah.
And again, like, I haven't looked into it, so, like, I'm not gonna, like, don't quote me on that. Like, maybe I'm completely incorrect, but I believe that there were a few people who have indicated, like, that's it, certain projects that they could have had a part in. They were not able to, surprisingly, amazingly, after this occurred.
I did enjoy hearing, like, certain tidbits throughout this movie, like that Scorsese's always hated Weinstein.
I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, it was really funny. Even before all this came out.
Yeah, that's it. I was like,
I mean, I would really assume that, like, women, we know, we kind of get this feeling when someone's a predator, and I would assume that men have this feeling too. Like, if they know that someone is a predator, they can probably feel it.
Exactly. And through more investigation on top of this, obviously Jodie also is made aware that apparently she should also speak to Gwyneth Paltrow about
that keeps coming back a lot.
Yeah, about an incident that occurred between her and Weinstein as well back in the 90s when she was, like, younger and getting started. For all of, and this is, it's awful. Like, it's gross to hear about all of this about everybody, like, I can think Gwyneth Paltrow and her pseudoscience for her goop shit is as ridiculous as it is, because it's wild, and she should be discredited as far as that's concerned, but this is awful, and this shouldn't happen to anybody at all.
Of course. And, like, in terms of, like, her being an actress, like, you really have to recognize that, we're talking about Ashley Judd, we're talking about Rose McGowan. We're saying if you were a 90s kid, you would recognize them. Everybody knows Gwyneth Paltrow. Everybody. She's one of the biggest actresses in Hollywood, which is why I think he was so afraid that she was going to speak out against him.
I believe so, yeah. I think because
I think if anybody was going to have credibility, it would be her.
Yeah, I think he was most concerned about whether or not she was contributing to the article that was being published. So Jodie does manage to speak to all of these people, and at the same time, Megan Twohey, obviously at that time, I think it was pretty brave of her to write that in the book, obviously, but that she unfortunately seems to have been dealing with what was potentially postpartum depression after the birth of her child, which must have been very difficult. But she obviously, within that time period, did decide to return to work as well, and they connect. And basically, I think also because of her past efforts with sexual assault reporting and everything, obviously Jodie feels like maybe it would be a good thing for them to work together.
Yeah, and I just think that it's very brave for her for Megan to do that, because I think they show at the beginning that after she wrote that article about Trump, like, Trump calls her and blasts her, and, you know, she had to deal with backlash from that.
And then the man was elected president, which is just depressing.
So can you imagine how she must have felt, like, to have gone to those lengths to get women to admit that the potential president has done this to them? She printed it, and it meant nothing.
It meant nothing.
He still got elected, and then she went and had a baby girl and had postpartum depression. Like, she must have felt like the world was on her shoulders.
Yeah, that's it. And, like, what's the point? Really?
Yeah.
And she kind of does allude to that at some point. Like,
She
I just don't
does.
know that it'll make a difference necessarily.
Yeah, like, she kind of says, yes, we're doing the work, but I don't know if it's going to mean anything.
Yes, exactly. But luckily, the two of them, I think, in talking to each other, decide that this is still something that they want to pursue. So, you know, like, they're both speaking to different people, each going off kind of in different directions to speak to, that's it, former Miramax employees, former assistants to Harvey Weinstein, people that they want to, that, you know, will have knowledge of this, women who worked with him. You know, like, Megan goes to Queens, I think she says, to speak to a woman who I'm sure has remained anonymous, which is why they never name her in the film either. And she has a very quick conversation with her, and she can't do it. She's like, no, thank you. And this is where you also start to get the way that she speaks about it very much alludes to the fact that there was some sort of financial settlement involved in this woman never speaking about what happened.
Yeah, and then you kind of realize that this wasn't the only one where this happened.
No.
And, you know, when you really think about this, the fact that these women were put in a position where they had to sign to accept money and stay silent, it was that they knew that they were up against something so big that they would never, ever be heard, and so they might as well just take the money. But you can see that this woman is so broken and distraught that, like, the money means nothing. You would, of course, the money means nothing.
The money doesn't make up for it.
It doesn't make up for it. But, you know, the fact that he just went through those years paying these women off.
Yeah.
And leaving, like, a trail of broken women in his midst. It's awful.
Yeah, so then you start to realize, you're like, oh, okay, so a lot of people are aware of this, because obviously you get an idea of the financial settlements, and in a scene that I really appreciated, Megan goes to see the former CFO of Miramax, like, one evening. She just kind of shows up at his place to ask him questions, and I believe that what makes him the most fearful and concerned about this is that his wife is standing there asking him what settlements. What is she talking about?
Yeah.
So she's just thrown a little wrench into, like, I can only imagine what that conversation's going to be like.
Well, I mean, you know, like, all of these people, like, as individuals, you know, you talk about the system protecting these predators, but the system is made up of people. And what they did a really good job of in this movie is how these reporters go and speak to all these individuals, and as people, they have this moment where they're like, yeah, I have to talk about this now. Like, I can't keep being silent.
Where eventually the silence just weighs on people too much, which I'm sure it does in situations like this. I can only imagine. So this is where we're starting to get a little bit of that. They're also contacting the EEOC to try and look into some of the past complaints that were filed against Miramax, but so many of them were dismissed within a matter of days, which is, I think, is odd, even though other, like, people that they're speaking to are like, that happens a lot. The investigators and stuff are like, oh, yes, that happens all the time, yada, 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 whatever.
I'm sure things just go away a lot.
Well, that's it. So then they're able to realize that obviously it's because they're financial settlements, because as soon as, that's my understanding, is that the women who were actually brave enough to file a complaint to try to move forward were blocked and basically told, like, hey, we'll fuck up everything for you, but if you're quiet about it, we'll just give you $1 million. Okay, thanks, bye.
Okay, thanks, bye.
Yeah, that's it. Please go away and stop talking about it, basically. And at the same time, they're also able to learn by speaking to the DA's office that socially, at least, Harvey Weinstein has connections to the DA as well. Yeah. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, I mean, like, this kind of gets alluded to a lot during the movie, where some of the victims will say, such and such tried to run that story, but every time he shuts it down.
Yeah.
So he has power across the country through, you know, the media, through the police, the justice system. It's quite terrifying.
Yeah, and you're also realizing, too, how many people he must have looking into things, because at one point Jodie's gets a phone call from Gwyneth Paltrow, literally, who's like, that's really scary. And if that, I assume that happened because it's in probably the book and the movie, and that's fucking terrifying. She said she was just having a few people over, and he just showed up at her house out of the blue to be, quote unquote, like part of the party. And she said, I have not seen him in years, and I didn't invite him, and he just showed up. That's fucking terrifying.
No, I'd just be like, please leave my house.
Yeah, get out.
Yeah, get out. I am Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah.
I am big enough.
Yeah, no, now that's it. Now she has enough power to have gotten away with that.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason he must have been really pissed about her not being interested in like getting out and away from him when she was younger as well is that I believe that he like harassed her when she was working on Shakespeare in Love, and she literally won an Oscar for that movie without him.
Oh wow.
As well, like right after that. So good for her.
Good for her.
Fuck you.
We stand a strong queen.
We stand a woman who will still go on and still be able to continue their career and stuff. And I think
Goop was not a good choice.
Oh, it's so bad. Oh, guys, it's so bad. Have you all, I mean, like, all you need to see is the thing about, like, selling, like, a $70 candle that apparently smells like your vagina, that, like, I just can't.
Gwyneth, just stop.
I can't do it. It's so bad.
Stop whatever you're doing.
It's so bad. You're such a talented actress. I think you should just stick to that. Just stick to that. Like, you're a very talented businesswoman, obviously.
Get your Iron Man suit on.
Yeah, and stop your pseudoscience bullshit. Stop telling people that they shouldn't wear sunscreen. God. Anyway. So that's terrifying. At the same time that this is going on, obviously, while they continue, you know, their investigation, they're also finally able from a couple of people to get names of 3 specific women who were involved in a couple of incidents in Europe, basically like in like London and Ireland and stuff, who had worked for the London Miramax office. Yes, that's it. Specifically about an incident that occurred at the Venice Film Festival, I think in the late 90s as well, if I'm not mistaken. And you know, poor Jodie. She has this really uncomfortable encounter where there's one woman named Rowena who she's trying to, she's been trying to get a hold of her by phone. They're not hearing anything. So she travels to her home, I think in California.
Yeah, because the people at the New York Times, they're just like, just get on a plane.
Yeah,
just
because
go.
they're like, we need proper sources being backed up, because right now everything is hearsay, and they need people to really
come
be like,
forward.
yes, this happened to me specifically. I witnessed this, or I was part of this because
this happened.
That's it, when this particular instance occurs. So she does go to speak to this woman, Rowena, who used to work as an assistant again. And when she gets there, Rowena's apparently out of the country, but her husband is there, and this poor man is blindsided because he obviously had no idea that any of this was occurring, and Jodie has this really uncomfortable conversation with him where she kind of tells him that something happened.
But he's not getting it.
And
she's just like, I'm gonna go.
And he's like, what do you mean? And she's like, and then of course she kind of realizes that she's probably said too much to him, and she's like, you really need to talk to your wife about this. And he's like, what the fuck? So I can only imagine what that did. Oh boy.
Yep.
So she's still looking to speak to her, but she does speak to a direct colleague of hers from that time named Zelda, who she meets with in London, who basically explains what she witnessed while she was there. Well, she, first of all, was harassed by Weinstein while she was working for the company as well. She describes having to wear a big coat, sit on an armchair instead of sitting on a sofa next to him so that he can't sit right next to you.
Those were the tips that she was given by other women who have worked with him.
Which, like, wow. If you need tips about how to protect your body from a superior that you're working with,
and everybody knows about this, like, this is
such
terrifying.
A problem.
Yeah.
And if you can in any way, please run in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
As fast as you can, and let people know what's going on.
Yep.
So she does speak to Zelda, who describes sort of, what she basically presumed to be around the time of the Venice Film Festival, which she basically presumed to be a rape of her colleague Rowena.
Yeah.
And after which point she was very brave. She confronted him in front of Martin Scorsese. Basically, is our idea that she was like, you have to come with me right now. And she said that she stated that the reason that she knew that he had really done this, and he had really done this, is because he didn't he didn't fire her immediately, which like most people would.
No, he just
or do
followed
anything.
her.
He followed her quietly and then just denied it the whole time.
Yeah.
And you're like, why would an innocent person do that? An innocent person would be like, excuse me, this is incredibly unprofessional. You are fired.
Yeah.
You're like a lowly assistant.
He followed her. Yeah.
He followed her fearfully to go see what she had to say. And I will have to give her props for that because that must have been terrifying.
Well, she was so angry.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, she's also able to speak to a woman named Laura Madden, who also worked originally as a runner and then kind of made her way up to assistant and was given a permanent position at the London Miramax office around that same time. And she had also experienced all of this harassment, and she describes a really uncomfortable encounter in a hotel room to do with a shower that I'm not going to go into because it's gross.
Yep.
And it makes everybody uncomfortable,
Yep.
but it's good that at least she's able, like, you know, this really gives Jodie like a lot of information, and I really love, so Zoe Kazan and Carrie Mulligan played the two reporters. I love both of them because I think that they have really human reactions as well to what's going on, which I think is probably easy as a woman to an extent.
I mean, you know, when that character, Laura, was describing her whole experience, she says, I assumed that this only happened to me, that he had tried this with others and they had said no.
And then she felt shame because she was like, but I let it happen to me.
But I let it happen.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine that a woman in this situation, a young woman at the beginning of her career, who gets forced to do something like this, like the most horrific thing.
Yeah.
That is what would go through your mind. Like, I bet I'm the only one.
I bet
the others. Like, you know, he was so... Like, the way that they describe it, and I know why she says that. Like, the way that each of them describe their encounter with him, it sounds like he's, like, this, like, sloppy school kid. Like, like, drooling over any woman that walks into his office. And, like, but he, like, forces himself on them. And... He's got no charm. He's just ick.
Oh, yeah,
know?
and you get some of that, too, because they have, like, a recorded conversation from an incident in which, this woman had filed a complaint, and the NYPD had given her a wire to wear to go back in to speak to him to try and get more evidence. This was, like, several years prior. And, like, the conversation between the two of them, just, like, he's... so insistent to an extent that you're like, you would be so put off by this. It's so gross.
Like, she keeps saying, I'm not comfortable. And he keeps saying, just 5 minutes, just 5 minutes.
Why did you touch my breasts yesterday? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And he's saying, like, just 5 minutes, are you really gonna, like, that's it, are you really going to ruin our entire relationship over 5 minutes? And you're like, ew, gross.
Ew, he's so disgusting. Like, I know that was obviously, like, an adaptation of that recording, but I think it was pretty...
It was probably pretty close. It was probably pretty close to it. So,
remind me, why did the NYPD not do anything with that?
Because apparently, based on in the conversation, you can partially tell that she's trying to lead him to admit that he groped her yesterday.
Yeah,
and he doesn't actually say that he did. But he keeps
asking. He's still trying to assault her.
Yes, but he's literally telling her, come in and go into the bathroom, come into the shower.
Yeah.
And stuff for like 5 minutes.
And she's like, no, I'm not comfortable.
And she's like, no, I'm not comfortable. And he's like, come in, do it.
Yeah.
And then he does that thing, and apparently he does. I don't know if this is something he would actually do, but this is so fucking gross. He regularly is like, no, I'm not going to do anything at all. I swear on my wife and my kids. Like,
yeah,
ew.
apparently the woman Zelda, she says that was his get out of jail free.
Ugh.
Yeah. He would always say that.
Disgusting.
And she said that's also how she knew he was lying, because he always used to say that when he was lying.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Obviously.
It's disgusting.
Oh, it's so gross. So when they are able to gather kind of all of these stories from people, they... At the same time, obviously, we've learned this because, you know, he's, like, shown up to Gwyneth Paltrow's house and stuff, but he's, like, sending his investigators out at the same time to, like, look into all of this and try to deter them from researching and from publishing a story about it. And he sends his lawyer in to speak to them at the New York Times, who very, you know, politely and professionally kind of declines to comment on the whole situation, which, like, surprise, surprise, what else would you expect? He's working for this man. What else is he going to say?
Yep.
But eventually, through a few conversations, he does acknowledge that there have been several past settlements.
But it doesn't take him very long to admit that.
I think he just wants to. I think he's like, fuck it.
I get this strong feeling from this man that he's just like, I'm really tired of covering this shit up. Yeah. Like, I don't believe in it. And like he admits it right away. And they even say at the New York Times, they're like, wow, I'm really surprised that they admitted to settlements so early here.
Yeah, I think people were like, oh God, gross, disgusting human, like disgusting gutter pig of a human being.
I don't want to be associated
with him, so maybe it's time. So that's what they do, basically. Yeah. So they go through that as well, and at the same time, Jody gets an anonymous tip to go and speak to a man named Erwin Ryder.
Yeah.
Who was
accountant.
He was an accountant, and he worked for Miramax and for Harvey Weinstein specifically for years.
His
like
family
in accounting.
As well. Yeah.
Oh yes, that's right.
That's what he said. So he's known them for years.
For years and years.
But
and
apparently
years.
he hates them, and I thought that was funny. Like
I know
the anonymous tip says this man hates Harvey Weinstein.
He said you should speak. Yeah, the woman who calls her says you should speak to Erwin Ryder. He hates Weinstein, and we're like, okay,
but he works for him. Interesting.
Yes. So he and Jody are able to meet and speak several times, and he does eventually basically just leave his phone on the table so that she has access to an internal memo from just a couple of years prior, because what he's saying is, you're looking into all of these cases and all of these women from the 90s, but without realizing that there are so many cases from much more recently as well.
Ooh, I get goosebumps.
Yeah. I read a couple of things. Like there's one actress who because I used to watch Boardwalk Empire when it was on, and there was one, an actress who was like a recurring character in Boardwalk Empire, and she alleges, I believe, that he raped her in 2010. So really not that long ago. And, Asia Argento as well, who's also an Italian actress. Her dad is Dario Argento, who's a very well-known Italian filmmaker. Really big deal. He did a ton of horror throughout the 70s, 80s. He's still making movies now. He did like the original Suspiria film, all kinds of stuff. She also has... Yeah, I've seen her in a couple of things. She's an actress, but she's another one who like... has alleged, and I believe that would have been like well after the year 2000, alleged assault as well.
Terrible.
And all of these things. Anyway, it's just the
system failed all these women.
Incredible, and it didn't even just fail; it deliberately covered up.
It really did, yeah.
So, once they get their hands on that memo, that really spurs things forward, because it's basically a memo from a former employee indicating that she's been made to feel sexualized and victimized and degraded throughout this
by the owner of this company. By the owner. She names Harvey Weinstein.
She does. Yeah. And she also indicates that there were other people who she witnessed basically being abused.
Yeah.
And felt just awful about it. And she's saying like she's not even 30 years old and she's just trying to build a career.
Yeah.
So with that knowledge, they're able to like really push forward with this, and
because the problem that they were running into was that so many of these women were coming forward to speak, but they'd already signed NDAs, so non-disclosure agreements, as part of their settlements, and so they didn't really have anything to go off until they had this memo, and because this woman who wrote the memo never signed a settlement and was never harassed herself.
Yes, yeah.
She's a witness account, and so they can use that. They can use her name as well.
Yes, in the article, which they do, which I can understand. They have a scene where she seems like incredibly unhappy about that, and I am sorry about that. I do hope that it helped them, but I am sorry that she felt like
thrown under the bus.
Felt like she was being ousted, basically, like outed because of this, even though, she had sent this memo and nothing had really been done about it, of course. So basically at this time, they're able to formally let the Weinstein Company know that they are publishing this story.
Yeah.
Obviously, he freaks out. His lawyers, I'm sure, freak out as well. They're asking for a statement because you have to do that. You have to ask for comment on the matter. Like, this is what we've been presented with. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah,
what's your response?
Are our facts. What are your facts?
Yes, now? What's your response to what we're putting out?
Their job as reporters is to put all this information together and then just put it out into the world and say, here you go, world, what do you think about this?
What do you think about this? Yeah, that's it, exactly. Then they don't really have to do anything else. That's just what you're supposed to do.
Yep.
So, of course, there's a ton of back and forth. I love that, of course, his lawyer is like, oh, we need 2 weeks to respond to this. And you're like, no, you have 2 days. Also, Andre, what's his name from Brooklyn Nine-Nine? Andre Braugher or whatever. He plays their...
He's awesome.
He's like, I don't know if he's their editor-in-chief or what he is. He's hilarious.
Oh, I just want to be like this man.
I know.
Like, he has no time for Harvey Weinstein. Yeah. Every time he calls him, he's just like, yes, Harvey. Okay, we'll speak to the reporters then, on the record.
Yep, have fun, bye.
Have fun, bye.
And then just basically hangs up the phone on him, which I really
It happens like twice, I think.
It does, yeah. It happens like a good few times. And with his lawyer as well. He's like, stop wasting our fucking time. It's pretty great. So they do manage to, through all of this, finish this article, and then finally what really propels things forward is that this did happen, is that Ashley Judd did decide that she said, yes, okay, it's fine, I'll like name me in the article, like I will publicly name me in the article as one of the accounts, and that I think really helped to push things forward as well.
Rose McGowan as well, because they show her
she
name.
Did. Yeah. She did later as well. She did decide to do it, and then I don't remember if it was during or after, I think it was after this article was published, Gwyneth Paltrow herself did confirm as well what had occurred for her too.
And that's his main concern, like, because they do a really good job of, like, kind of showing Harvey Weinstein without having Harvey, obviously, without having him.
Of course.
Like, so they have, like, kind of like someone who kind of looks like him from the...
He looked like him from the back, I will say.
He really did. And he just keeps saying, do you have Gwyneth Paltrow? Is it Gwyneth Paltrow? Like, is she speaking? And
because think of even, that's it, like, Marvel's in full swing in 2017. She was very well known.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, she still is, obviously, and she pretty much had been the entire time.
Yep.
But I would say with, like, modern audiences, like she's like Pepper Potts in the Iron Man
that's
movies
what I'm saying.
And stuff.
Like,
so like she's very up there
by people of all ages at this point, you know, from her whole career.
Exactly. So with all of that, they're able to publish the story, which is basically how they, you know, end the film itself. Obviously, is when they actually publish it. But you know, so basically they published. My understanding, and this is what I'm looking at timeline wise, the Times article was published on October 5th of 2017, and within basically a month of its publication, 82 women came forward to allege some form of assault.
82 women.
Against Weinstein specifically.
And those aren't the women who signed settlements or anything.
No, these are other women who never said anything and are able to freely speak about this more without like real fear of prosecution. And then obviously he was indicted, arrested, and I mean at the time of filming, now we've got like a little bit more. At the time of filming of the movie, he was already serving a 23-year sentence for rape and sexual assault in New York. But now they've also added, as of right now, when we're recording, they've also added another 16 years to that from cases in Los Angeles, and there are also pending cases in London as well regarding the same thing.
So he has a minimum of a 39-year sentence.
Yes, and he is in his late 60s now, so thank God he'll be dead, and he won't get out of prison. Hooray!
And for those of you who don't know, when he was in prison recently, he had to undergo surgery for testicular gangrene. So, you know, there is some poetic justice in the world.
Yeah, you know, I'm telling you, every once in a while, like, you know, there's so often where you're like, God, I wish people who were just awful, disgusting monsters would just get what's coming to them. And then every once in a while it happens and you're like, yes.
Yeah, they had to do some really weird procedure. Either they had to remove his testicles or they had to put one in his leg. There was something with his leg. I don't know the details. It's like really gross, but
but so
it just makes me so happy.
So satisfying. We're literally laughing about it. This is an incredibly well-made film. This is a super interesting thing to me, though. And again, it's just because I've read bits and pieces about things. So my understanding, and this is also just because I find it interesting that, and again, there's only so much that can be done, but like the number of people who would have been aware of this and never said anything. I'm not even talking about the people who covered it up, like the lawyers and like Bob Weinstein and like all of those motherfuckers. Like, fuck those people. His brother who ran Miramax and stuff with him and the Weinstein Company with him.
Right.
Fuck those guys.
Oh, yeah.
To hell and straight back. But I'm talking about, like, other people who, in Hollywood, my understanding, Rose McGowan's been very outspoken about this, is that all of you knew, like, a ton of people knew what was going on.
And you just brushed it aside.
Yes, and no one ever did anything about it or really said anything about it because, like, okay, so she's alleged, and again, all of this is hearsay. I don't know what's true and what's not. She's alleged that after what happened to her, she spoke to Ben Affleck about this and very tearfully told him what was going on. And according to her, his response was to get very mad and then very angrily say, I've told him not to do things like this anymore. Which is...
Ben Affleck, I am no longer your friend.
Yeah. So, which, again...
Fuck you, too.
I don't know what's true. I don't know what's not true.
Yeah.
But if that's true, I really think that other people deserve to be shamed more than they have been, because so many people were apparently aware of this and very complicit in what was going on. So, fine, they didn't...
That's not okay.
They didn't participate, but they sure didn't do anything to stop it. And it's... okay, so, like, when... And my other thing that I did come across was that when Gwyneth Paltrow, when she had her unfortunate encounter... she was either dating or engaged to Brad Pitt at that time. And she obviously told him about it when it happened, of course. And my understanding is that he confronted Weinstein, like, at an event that they were both at and told him to, like, fuck off and leave her alone and, like, never talk to her again, basically. But that's it. And so I appreciate that he stood up for his partner, obviously. Of course I do. Of course I do. But, like, then you just didn't say anything. You just assumed, Gwyneth is the only woman that he was doing this to at all?
I mean, he did produce this movie.
I know, and then he produced this movie, so I found that was really interesting, and I wanted to bring it up.
Maybe he's, like, sorry? I mean, I can't imagine the amount of, like, you know, it's so hard to speak out about this. It's so hard. But I can't imagine the amount of regret I would feel if I'd done nothing. And I
know. Yeah, I know.
And, like, and then you're sitting there and you're looking at the people who were brave enough and they all came together and they did something. And then you're like... wow, I could have totally done more.
I feel maybe I could have done something earlier, and maybe I could have prevented something that happened later from happening. I don't know. Look, you know, we can devil's advocate it all we want in the sense of, yes, obviously he was also young at that time and was also, you know, probably looking to get work again at some point in his life.
I mean, I think the problem is, if we want to be really honest, all of these people covered it up and they didn't do very much because... he was a very powerful man in Hollywood who could make them very wealthy. And they all became very rich.
Yeah.
So, like, even the ones who eventually, like, you know, his lawyer, his accountant, like, all these people who eventually kind of cracked under the pressure of having these reporters asking them questions... it was really because they realized that it was the end of the line for Harvey Weinstein anyway.
For sure.
So they were just kind of like, you know what, like, I guess I've made enough money off of him and now I can at least speak out about it.
Yeah, and I find, like... and
at the end of the day, it was the money, right?
For sure. And for some people, too, it was, like, just sort of, like, not being aware of certain details. I will say, like, again, I don't know, like, this Erwin Ryder guy, I have no idea, the accountant, but he said, like, when he read an account that Jodi presented to him, he was like, I didn't know it was stuff like this. Like, you know, I thought that he was just cheating on his wife a whole bunch, and that these were, like, willing participants, basically. Like, he thought he was just having a bunch of affairs.
Yeah. Now, whether that's true or not,
who knows? We don't know. We weren't there. I have no idea. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Yeah. But at the same time, you know, I'm sure that for some people, that probably is what they thought. They were probably like, oh, he's fucking around a whole bunch, you know?
I can't imagine being married to this pig.
Oh my God. Yeah. Good for his wife for, like, immediately being like, nope, no thank you, and just filing for divorce.
But again, like, she must have known to an extent. I don't know. Like, I can't really make that claim because I don't know. But
look, I wouldn't want to say anything like that. There are plenty of...
It just must be horrible to be married to somebody like that
100%.
And have children with them.
There are legitimate serial killers whose spouses had no idea what was going on with them. And
Melania Trump, though, I don't know. I have no excuse for her.
Oh, no, she's a lot, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't. Yeah. Some of them you're like, yeah, okay, you definitely knew there's something going on. But
Melania.
Yeah. But when it comes to, like, things like this, I wouldn't want to shift blame onto someone else in any way, shape, or form, just because you probably were aware that your husband was fucking around and you were very financially comfortable, so you didn't say anything or do anything about that, doesn't mean you knew what he was doing.
Exactly. Like, I think, you know, there's kind of like ignorance is bliss. Yes. So perhaps there's like a forced ignorance sometimes.
To an extent, there probably is, yeah.
But anyway, he's a horrible man. I'm glad he's rotting in prison, and his testicles are either out of his body or in his leg.
Yeah.
One or the other, I'm not really sure.
Yeah. But I know that this movie's garnered like a good amount of critical success. It didn't do very well at the box office is my understanding. Probably a combination of like, this isn't the type of film that like brings the people in droves, to be fair, because it's a very dramatic film. And also no offense to our current society, but we do kind of live in a world where people are just like, okay, I'm over this now. Like, I was an activist about it for 5 minutes, and now, like, I don't feel like talking about it anymore. And part of me wonders sometimes if I'm like, is it just because you can't be bothered with it anymore? Because I think it's still important to talk about it.
Oh, I know. I really think that the pandemic did a number on people. I think that there was so much of like having to have an opinion about things during the pandemic that I feel like a lot of people are now just like, I don't want to have an opinion about anything that doesn't concern me specifically
ever
because
again.
I'm exhausted.
Yes, yeah.
Which is not the way to live, but I'm just brainstorming here.
But it could be like a self-preservation thing as well, which can be understandable for certain people. But yeah, this is, otherwise, yes, it has garnered like a lot of critical success. I think Carey Mulligan's been nominated for an Oscar, if I'm not mistaken.
I hope she wins this time. She's already been nominated for 2.
Like a few other ones. Has she not won before?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, Jesus, just give her a fucking Oscar, honestly.
She's great.
I know, really. She's great in everything. I don't know why people
really
are waiting.
is.
Anyway.
We digress.
This is a very good film about a very, very heavy topic. However, a topic that I think is important to still talk about because things still happen. These things still go on. Just because Harvey Weinstein is in prison doesn't mean no one else is doing this. There are powerful men all over the world in all sorts of different industries, and they deserve to be brought to justice for the things that they're doing that they should not be doing.
Just do your jobs, people.
Yeah, just
go home.
Just do your jobs. Just run your companies like a normal human being.
Stop power tripping.
Stop trying to take advantage of your employees. They don't deserve it. I'm sure you're not paying them enough. So,
Facts.
So, have you seen this movie? Have you read the book? You know, any of this stuff. That's what
we want to know.
Yeah. So you can let us know over on Instagram at fullybookedca. You can also check out our Facebook group, which is facebook.com/groups/bookwaswaybetter. And if you're still here with us after this kind of heavy start to the month, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening to this episode, because it really helps us get the show out in front of more people. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.